Well, joining us now is Mr. Luis Sargento Freitas, PhD from the University of Jyväskylä. Did I pronounce that correctly?
It's Jyväskylä. Good day, good day.
Jyväskylä. All right, wonderful. All right, so, well, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Portugal toppling their fascist government. When people think fascist governments, they think Spain, they think Italy, Germany, of course, but many people forget Portugal. What was life like under the fascist government in Portugal, and what led up? What kind of conditions led up to the revolution finally happening in 1974?
Good day. Thank you again for the invitation. Yes, I can number a small list of behaviors that were forbidden at the time, behaviors that we nowadays consider completely normal. I could give you some examples. For example, people couldn't play cards on the train. People couldn't kiss on the street. Obviously, people couldn't criticize the government. There's suppression of freedoms. There's censorship in the media and the books. Sometimes even books that were not political were censored in order to punish a publisher that had made mistakes in the past. For example, female flight attendants couldn't get married. Women were forced to obey their husbands in all aspects of life. Women couldn't vote and could not leave the country without the husband's approval. Coca-Cola was forbidden. A license to use a lighter in public was necessary if you wanted to just use a lighter. Obviously, homosexuality was a crime. So these are, nowadays we would see as completely normal behaviors, but just forbidden at the time. We have to remember that this was in my parents' generation, so it was not that long ago. And what led to the fall of this regime? At first, the regime was well viewed by the West and by the United States. At first, from the neutrality in World War II, then as a founding member of NATO and a founding member of EFTA. But as time progressed, particularly because of its colonial policy, the regime got more and more isolated, up to a point that almost the only ally that it had around the world was apartheid South Africa, because they were both against the independentist movements in Africa. And the continuation of the colonial policy eventually led to discontent between armed forces, which led to the creation of the Movimento Forças Armadas, the movement of armed forces, which eventually toppled the regime. And that happened on the 25th of April, 1974. But the year after that, for about a year and a half, Portugal was also in a very somewhat complicated situation, because the Communist Party in Portugal started getting a lot of power, and there was also a fear by the United States that Portugal eventually could become a Soviet-style country. It was called the Cuba of the West. But that didn't happen. Another important day is the 25th of November, 1975. That day led to the complete, let's say almost final shift towards democracy, which then also, this revolution also led to a complete change in Portuguese foreign policy, because it abandoned what's called the Atlantic, then the colonial perspective, and this was completely shifted, and we headed towards a foreign policy based on Europeanization. At first, by joining the European Economic Community, which then became the European Union, but also trying to maintain a close dialogue with Portuguese-speaking countries around the world, as it is still today, with good diplomatic relations. And and this it's almost unbelievable to imagine that some some of this happened in my country. And let me point out that there is now an exhibition in the Warsaw Public Library in Ulica Kościołowa 2628 that is about the Portuguese Revolution, which is called the Revolution Without Blood. Even though Portuguese people call it the Revolution Without Blood, but let's also not forget that the colonial war took a lot of lives. But people still call it today the Revolution Without Blood because the government and the regime was toppled without
violence.
Without violence, yes. A bit different from, for example, how it happened in Romania with the fall of the Soviet.
Oh yeah, regime, I remember that. It was Christmas time, and I remember watching those images coming out of Bucharest. Incredible times. Now, okay, so let's say 1974 and 1975. There are people still alive in Portugal that remember that regime that ruled Portugal for so many years. So I guess there are about 3 generations have been born since then, but many people still alive. So a lot of people would think, well, that means Portugal is pretty much immune to any sort of right-wing narratives, any sort of populist narratives, but that's not the case. It looks like the Chega party is gaining a lot more votes. They're taking votes away from the traditional center-right. What's happening here? How and why?
Yes, there are many reasons. I think one lesson that we must learn also from the 25th of April is that democracy is not just a given state, a given status. We have to fight for it every day, and that's also one of the lessons that we took from the 25th of April. But Portuguese society has also changed. It has become more open, and I believe sometimes people are they fear change. They fear the changing of their traditions or people with different mentalities, and sometimes that can feed the extremist parties. In these last years, there appears to have a shift more towards the far right or the radical right to Chega, and not so much to the left wing, to the far left or the radical left. But still, the extremist parties also sometimes agree on some measures. Sometimes people say that the extremes touch each other. Let's say.
They do. They touch each other on the other side. They certainly do.
Yes.
So, I mean, a lot of people are blaming the right wing for the divisions, but I mean, a lot of this also we could lay blame on the left because they're also becoming more and more extreme and causing reactionary forces, which are the extreme right. These extremities, they need to be tempered somehow, and I think. I wonder why, especially in a place like Portugal, where it's only been 50 years since they lived under a really right-wing regime, that they don't understand this process. And what can we learn from this?
Yes, I believe that, as I said before, that democracy is something that we have to build every day. But we also must worry about economic growth, about people's state and quality of life. So, and that's probably one of the most important elements, which is if people believe that economic growth will continue and they have a good optimist view for the future, then they will be less tempted to vote for extremist parties. So people, I think Portugal or Poland or any other country should focus on not only economic growth, but also welfare and people living under a good quality of life. And that is, I would say, almost for sure, a good recipe to fight against.
I think that's a very pragmatic approach, and I have to agree with you. You know, when people are well fed and they're secure, they have a lot less tendencies for any sort of reactionary movements. Absolutely right. Sir, a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.